Hello there, it's Tom here, and this is Chapter 40 of Gunnerkrigg Court, The Stone. And this chapter is one of my all-time favourites, because it brings together a few elements that I was interested in exploring in the comic. The first half of the chapter involves showing a lot of Jones's history and background, and then the second part continues from what Annie and Coyote were talking about in the previous chapter. So, at the beginning we see Annie confront Jones directly and ask her what she is, which is a question that a lot of people had while reading the story, and it was something that I'd teased over the years. And this was finally a look at her background and hopefully an explanation as to just what she was. And it goes into this sequence which I had a really good time drawing, where we start to look through Jones's past. And it starts off with a slow shift backwards in time. We can see a few glimpses of Jones being in the court, interacting with some of the characters like Eglamour and the headmaster. And then we can even start to see that while Eglamour and even Donnie here on this page are young kids, Jones is still the same age, so we start to see the nature of her existence. And as we continue to head back through Jones's past, I tried to chronologically link a lot of these sections together so that they made sense if you were to read them in either direction, and we can start to see how Jones wasn't always called Jones, and she has different names along the way. And we get a look at how every once in a while she will change her name as the years have gone by. Going back a bit more, we see Jones is on one of the ships, arriving at Jamestown in Virginia, and then even further beyond that, we see her several centuries ago. This scene here just giving a small glimpse that maybe somebody has found out that she's not quite what she seems to be. Further beyond that, we see her at the burning of Rome. And then this page here is kind of one of my favorites, even though I'm not quite sure how interesting anybody but myself would really find this small sequence. I really like the idea of just Jones as a figure walking silently through a vast desert and not really anything else happening. I guess I like this idea because, in my mind at least, the information that is given here is enough to convey the feeling that I wanted to get across. The whole point of Jones is that she's a very solitary character, but she's constantly moving through the world. And I guess this page here is an outright depiction of that. She's walking from the right to the left, as if walking backwards through time. And we don't even get to see her face, we just see just enough of a figure to understand that it is Jones. And we can see her walking from nothing and towards nothing, or at least something that is so far away that we, the readers, are not able to see it, and yet Jones is still walking. And then the page before that one, in the past we've seen that Jones has a very unnatural strength. We see it again here, very briefly, that she's able to take the full brunt of a collision with a particular type of bison that existed during the Pleistocene epoch, which kind of gives a hint that this was taking place 20 to 30,000 years ago. And then before that we see that time really is passing in much bigger leaps. Here I wanted to depict very literally Jones walking out of an ice age and seeing the ages of the earth shift before her. And then before that I had an opportunity to draw some of my favourite creatures, which are these prehistoric Eurypterids here, which are animals that I think are extremely interesting in the way they look, and you can sort of see that when I designed Lindsay a few chapters ago. Here it may not be as evident to readers of the comic, but for me I find this page very important because it was the first time that Jones ever opened her eyes, or eye in this case. And what that means is if you look on the next page, where she is being submerged in lava, ostensibly at the beginning of the creation of the planet, where she has her eyes closed, the period between here and then later on when Eurypterids were in the ocean is again the passing of many millions of years, implication being that she spent that whole time unmoving with her eyes closed. And I decided to go with this because we learned that Jones is a creature that can really only learn by example. She says that she has no imagination, and I'll get to that later on in this video, but for me this part of Jones's history is important because with nothing else around her to give any indication of how she should be acting or what she should be doing, there is no reason for her not to assume that her existence is exactly as it is since the beginning of the creation of the planet. She may have eyes and limbs and eyeballs, but she has no way of learning how to use them or what function they serve. And just this small motion here represents a giant leap that Jones had to make over many, many years, where she realizes that she is able to open her eye, and it's really the first step that she would have taken that opened up the rest of the world and the experiences that she could then go on to have later on. So as this sequence of pages comes to an end, we see that essentially she has been around since the creation of the planet. Here we see that the Earth is at the stage when it was being formed in the accretion disk of the Sun, however many billion years ago. And ultimately this leads to Jones herself outright admitting that she does not know what she is. But I didn't want that to seem like it was just a cop-out, because I almost wanted it to seem like the answer to what Jones is that she does not know. Almost as if that unsatisfying conclusion is the conclusion itself, whereby you're presented with all the information and all the secrets are uncovered, and yet you're still left without a concrete answer. And really, if Jones doesn't know what she is, there's no way that anyone else would know better than her. So with that sequence done, we now go into Annie and Jones talking a bit more about Jones's life on the Earth. She mentions that given the relative scale of time that she's been around, the time that creatures known as humans have been around are a very small fraction of her existence, and how she's interested in observing them because they're the nearest thing to what she visually looks like. Although she does emphasize that beyond looking like a human, she really does not consider herself as one of them, because inside each human there is this depth of emotion and feeling that she is aware of, but she is also aware that she is not able to experience. She realizes that she's closer to a lump of stone or a moving statue than she is an actual human. And on this one page, she gives a very succinct and cold breakdown of herself. And she outright says that everything she's learned socially has only been done by observation. And this is why the moment where she opened her eyes for the first time is important to me, because if she hadn't taken that first initial minute step, she would probably still be under the ocean somewhere, not really realizing that she has eyelids to open, or what that would lead to. So Annie and Jones talk a bit more about just Jones's existence and how she travels the world and uses the court as a place to come back to, and in return the court examines her as a curiosity, showing a small glimpse here that even X-rays don't penetrate her body. And all this is basically leading up to what Annie came here for in the first place. In the previous chapter, Coyote said to ask Jones about the stars in the sky, and Jones mentions that this is a thought experiment that Coyote has brought up in the past, and we see here also that Jones has heard of Coyote's great secret, that being that he does not exist, and further to that he's probably created through the collective will of humans in the ether. You add this together with the fact that Coyote is known not to be a liar. This raises the question how, if he was able to put the stars in the sky, and there are many other creatures in the universe that the comic takes place in that are also mythologically responsible for putting stars in the sky, how can that be so if Jones has first-hand knowledge to see that the stars were always there before there were any humans around to have thought of the story of Coyote putting the stars in the sky? And I wanted to include this as a very outright paradox that Jones herself is aware of, and she characterizes it by asking, can something exist before it is created? And that seems like a very simple question, but we can see that Jones is a direct contradiction to what would be the obvious answer. And so Annie and Jones spend a bit longer discussing what they were talking about, and Jones helping Annie lead to some conclusions that Coyote might have been trying to point out to her. And this is one of the things I like about writing and plotting things with Coyote. Annie and Jones together have sort of uncovered what Coyote was getting at, but they still don't quite know what Coyote is up to. And that's the feeling that you always get when Coyote's around. And then this leads to another thing that happened at the end of the previous chapter, where Eglamour kind of gave Annie a bit of a wake-up call, saying that she's been a little bit unruly lately, and Jones repeating the same sentiment, and kind of giving her a warning that if you take into consideration everything that Coyote has been telling her, that it might be in her best interest to not take things too lightly, especially considering the kind of things that she's been getting into lately. And this just brings us to the end of the chapter. This bonus page is just a bit of a laugh at Jones's expense, kind of pointing out outright how Jones just doesn't smile, and I wanted to give the impression that it just wouldn't look right on her face. And, of course, I would actively make sure not to draw the expression that Jones would be giving here in the third panel, because anything that I could draw would not be anywhere near as interesting or weird as what the reader would be able to imagine. I just think it's funny that Jones's smile is so upsetting to Annie. Anyway, that's the end of that. Be sure to smash that like button and come back again for Chapter 41, Changes.